In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. As he got a bit nearer, John saw that the song came from a young woman sitting on a rock near the mouth of the cave. Her voice seemed to echo back to her from the depths of the cave, like another singer was taking up her song. The lower half of her body was in the water. The white skin of her back and shoulders could be seen beneath her long yellow hair. As she sang, the sunlight shone brightly upon her, showing the glint of a mirror in her hand, and a patch of silver glistened beneath her waist, for there was her fish's tail shining in the morning light. She was a mermaid.
Welcome to the Orkneyology podcast. And today we're talking with ourselves.
Hour with the moon again.
Hour with the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are, having a blether again. And this time we're going to talk a little bit more about folk tales, but we have a particular reason and a particular type of folk tale from a particular area.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like to tell us about it?
Well, last year I was contacted by Nicola Guy, who is an editor with the History Press. Now, I had done a book for them in the past, Orkney Folk Tales, and I had selected a couple of stories from that for the Anthology of Scottish Folk Tales book that they compiled. And she contacted me and said that they would like to have a book called, well, to start with, it was called Scottish Folk Tales of the Coast. And that actually was a bit difficult because it was trying to find stories that was specifically from the coast. Mm. But then later, they sort of seemed to have a change of heart, and then they said that they wanted it to be of coast and sea. And I thought, that throws it much more wide open. So that made it easier. So I had to then go and look for stories relating to the coast and sea from around the whole coast of Scotland.
How did you go about that?
With great difficulty. There were stories that I knew, and so that was one thing. But the thing is, I didn't want to just recycle all the usual suspects, all the stories that you normally hear and that people would kind of go, oh, right, okay, I know this one, I know that one, I know that one, I know that one. So I wanted to try to find some that were, some had to be the classics, but at the same time, I wanted to include a lot of much lesser known stories that were people might not know. So it was a case of having to search for ones. Some online, not much. Mostly it was from books, and also from memory as well, from stories that I'd heard from other storytellers in the past, or little clues of stories that they told that I went and tried to find the original source material for it and then tell that in my own way,
We have a fairly extensive library here in our home, but for people who don't necessarily own a lot of antiquarian books of folk tales and all kinds of interesting things. Do you have any suggestions for how to find new tales or more obscure tales?
Well, it's looking in some of the smaller, lesser-known books. Doing a search online helps. There was some stories that that came up, and sometimes when you find one book, look in the bibliography in the back, and there was stories that I bought a few books that contained stories that I wanted to use. And I just needed to kind of, read them, let them soak in, because basically you're just like a big sponge. You're just drawing it all in and holding it there for a while and working it out in your own head as to how you want to tell the story and, an angle come from, but also just, something that's maybe a slightly different tact, it's difficult to explain, but yeah, look up once online, see what you can find, see where they come from, check bibliographies, ask advice as well from others, and just keep on plugging away. And I mean, if you've got a good library service, you can get into library loans and such like. You don't have to spend a fortune buying books. I'm just a bit of a... I love the fact that recently somebody was saying that, the derogatory term of bookworm is that I'm a book dragon. I lie on a hoard of books.
I like that.
Well, so did I, because orm is Old Norse for worm, but it means anything from an earthworm to a snake to a sea monster to a dragon. So they're all orms. The stoorworm, the stoororm in Old Norse, giant sea monster in Orkney's folk tales, and that came from Scandinavia, and it's the big serpent, basically.
Book dragon, I like that.
Yeah, so a bookworm could be, you go ha ha ha, thinking some little pink wiggly thing, and then they come in and there's a massive dragon sitting there on top of the books. Go, what are you looking at?
Your collection is more dragon sized than worm sized, I think.
Well,
But like you said, if someone doesn't want to go out and purchase all kinds of new books, you can get things through the library.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the librarians themselves are a very big help in helping you to find maybe more obscure sources. And then, you were talking about letting it digest a little bit, soaking it in and making it your own. I think it's the same for writers as well as storytellers. It's very similar, and you may be retelling a very classic tale and you want to make it come at it from your own viewpoint, from a different way. You don't want to just rehash what somebody else has already said. And yet, if it's a folktale, I my own feeling on folktales is that they're always changing because they're of the folk, and everybody has their own viewpoint and will tell stories in their own way. But I feel like there also should be a bit of a respectful approach where you're not going too mad with, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that if you want to do this sort of thing, if you want to write, do retellings of folktales or tell stories as a storyteller, you have got to have a very deep love and appreciation and respect of the story. And so you stick faithfully to it. You don't change the ending or change characters. And I see that quite a lot these days. And I mean, some people would completely disagree with me. It's entirely a personal thing, but these stories have been around for 1,000 years. What hell right do you have to say, well, I'm going to change it now to fit in with my own particular view of life or whatever? No, just leave it. Write your own original material if you want, but leave that kind of leave it as, it's like a piece of history. If you decided that you want to change the result of a war or something like that, or you want to, say, dress up the whole slave trade thing as actually being a really good thing, instead of something absolutely abhorrent, then people would immediately call you out about it and say, what you're doing, this is wrong. Mm. I feel the same with folk tales. I mean, telling it in your own way, that is what you should do. Mm-hmm. You should not just repeat it word for word, but at the same time, you shouldn't just dissect it and change it to suit your own agenda.
Mm. I agree with that, and I feel like the reason that the folk tales have stayed around so long is because they have a certain truth in them that people can get a lot of benefit from. And if you mess with them too much, you might take the goodness out and just have it be kind of a flat, not that interesting story. Where the folk tales are, some of them are very strange, but they say something to in your soul.
Mm. There's one story that I have in here, which is one of the better known ones. Is Duncan Williamson's story called Death in a Nut, about Jack, the anti-hero, who lives with his mother, and his mother is very ill, and she says that she will soon be dead, she's going to die. And he's a beachcomber, and he meets death coming along the shore on its way to gather his mother. He's got the long robes on and the hood and the scythe over his back. And so Chuck does what any loving, dutiful son does and beats the shit out of him until he's... I can't give away too much of the story.
Right. No spoilers.
But he makes sure that death is well and truly out of the way. His mother makes a remarkable recovery, but then they discover that they can't get anything to eat because nothing will die. They tried to break an egg in a frying pan, it won't break. They boil them, they're stone cold. They try chopping the head off a chicken, nope, the head springs straight back on again. They manage to pull up some carrots, but they can't peel them, and they can't bite them, break into them. They're like iron. And this is because nothing will die, because death is now off duty. And so he ends up telling his mother what he's done. And there's a beautiful wisdom in it where she says, you've done a bad thing, Chuck. You shouldn't have done that, because everybody needs death. You can't not have death in the world. And she says that, the old people go, but they make way for young people. And it's the way it's always been. And so he comes to realize that, and he has to search the shore to try to find death and release him. And when he does, he's sort of sitting on a rock weeping, saying that he wished that he hadn't done what he had done, because people misunderstand death and they think that he's bad, but he's actually a kind man who relieves sufferers of pain and takes them to a place where they will never endure pain and misery and hardship again, a world without pain. And that is when death makes a reappearance and can be released.
So we pretty much spoiled that one, but we won't do that to any others.
Well, the fact that it's called Death in a Nut probably was a bit of a giveaway, but
it's a good example of the wisdom of stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's an entertaining story, but it's also got a punch to it that's true.
Well, I mean, I'm indebted to Linda Williamson for granting me permission to use two of Duncan's stories in this collection.
Who's Linda?
Linda Williamson, Duncan's widow. And
I know that. I just didn't know if everyone would.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm just assuming everybody knows Linda, but in traveller stories, you do find a great deal of deep philosophy of very serious topics and some real ancient wisdom being passed down through the generations. It's a way of kind of, understanding the world around you and life in general. Because, well, I don't know about you, but when I was born, did I get an instruction manual? No. There was bugger all.
Did your parents?
Well, I don't know. I never asked.
That's the way I always think of it when your children are born. What do I do with this?
I know.
Where's the instruction manual?
I didn't get any instructions when mine were born, but
I guess that's as close as we can get to an instruction manual. The books, the stories that we read to our children or tell to our children.
And also it's a way of passing on that moral without being preachy. Mm-hmm. That life is not always easy, but if you're a good and decent person, that is the way to lead your life, and that it will be rewarded. Good will always triumph over evil. Sadly, in the world, that isn't always the case, but, doesn't mean to say that you should then go, change sides, because, there's enough arseholes in the world. We don't need to get more of them, We've got plenty, thank you very much. The world's full up with them. But then the world is also full up of really good, decent people. You never hear about them. They don't make the news. They don't make the headlines because they just get on with life and are thoughtful and compassionate. And so, and that doesn't make for good, catchy headlines.
When you were researching the stories, did you notice any different types of stories or feelings around them, maybe with the coastal stories that you hadn't noticed before because you were looking into these different areas of Scotland?
Mm-hmm. The stories, well, obviously there's different stories and they all differ one from the other. But it's, what I had already noticed in the past is that there are a lot of stories that are warnings of how to behave, how to live your life, how to be decent, but how to avoid danger as well, the dangers that are placed in your way. And the devil appears in quite a few of the stories that is in this book. And he is always trying to trick people.
He's more or less not so much the biblical devil as a trickster figure, wouldn't you think?
Well, that is how the traveller people always saw it in Scotland. For anybody that doesn't know about the travellers, can't call them gypsies because they're not gypsies, but they are the people, indigenous people to this place who travel from one place to another, lead a nomadic life and pick up work where they can. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's really that many these days who are on the road. I mean, it would be quite rare.
You had a friend who used to stop by the house when you were a child to sell your mom things, right?
Well, yeah, there was an old lady called Jessie Nowlin who used to come by the house, and she had the pack over her back, that she was a bit fly because she had like a minivan, but she would park it out at the end of the road and then walk in to make this big thing of, oh, I'm a poor old woman walking for miles, carrying this pack. And we all knew damn fine that. I mean, she had a car sitting out there. It was fun and nobody, but, it was part of the part of the performance kind of thing. And then there was the pack would be untied. She always turned up at Warhouse around meal times. And my mother always would give her, whatever we were eating. The main meal was the middle of the day, so there'd be like soup and then there'd be some meat and ties. And then the bundle would get untied, and then she would pull out all this stuff. Here's a pair of drawers for your man, And, oh, no, I don't need that. And
was she selling mostly clothing?
it was clothing, yeah. It was all clothing.
But other travelers would sell, you said they were tinsmiths, right? A lot of
yeah, that's where the term tinker came from, because it was it was a man that worked tin. And it actually was men who worked the tin. Women made clothes pegs and, heather brushes for sweeping down fires with and things like that. So they had their own brand of material that they made, whereas the men made buckets and pans, pots and pans. But they also used to repair old pots and pans that were kind of wearing out or leaking or whatever. They would solder them up. So that is where they came. There was a claim, because I know I'm friends with many of them, and then sadly some of the greatest storytellers were travellers like Duncan and Stanley Robertson and Alec John Williamson as well, a cousin of Duncan's, who never made it big because he stayed in the Highlands because his wife needed care, and he refused to leave her alone overnight. So he never went down to Edinburgh to the big festival down there or anything. But he was as good a storyteller as I've ever had anyone,
That's a good man.
Yeah, but he always had to be home at night, and but they had this belief, that the Chak stories were very popular among them. It was the kind of unlikely hero made good. He's either the really idiot son, who rises to the top, but not through brains. Then again, there are other Chak stories where Chak is like friends with a king, and he is extremely clever, and so he saves the king on many occasions, and is rewarded for it. But he's not caring because he's doing it because the king's his friend, and that's what you do for your pals. But in the traveller tradition, the devil was very much seen as a trickster. He wasn't evil in trying to sort of like cart you off to hell. He was just there to try to trick people, bamboozle them, fool them. But he wasn't just that sharp attack himself. So people were always able to outsmart him, which of course led to great kind of, annoyance to him and great hilarity to everyone else. But a very different from the biblical devil,
Yeah.
But there is actually one of the stories here. It's the first story in the collection is called the 3 Questions. And it's about a young guy who he works on a fishing boat, but he is useless. His name's Davy, and he was put on a fishing boat when he was a boy, and he hates it. He's never been any good at it. All the local skippers know his reputation, so he just gets all the dirty jobs of gutting the fish and throwing all the small fish back over the side. And this, of course, is back in the days when you had small nets that you could do that. These days you get things that suck in everything, and I don't suppose there's much thrown back at all. I could be wrong. I don't work on a fishing boat, so don't send in hate mail. I don't know. I admit that. But in this case, he pulls in a fish. He's throwing the little fish over the side, which he's very happy about, because that's the only part of the job that he likes, is actually throwing back the little fish and sparing their lives. And while he's working away at that, there's a beautiful big fish wriggles its way to the top. And it looks like a mackerel because it's got the black and blue markings down the side of it and the silver belly. But it's about 4 times larger than a mackerel. And he thinks it's such a beautiful fish. And it looks so sad that he throws it overboard. He looks around. Skipper's not watching, so he throws it over the side. But somebody saw him and told the skipper, and so he's
fired.
He's been told that he's, as soon as they get ashore, he's getting kicked off. He's sacked. He's not going to get paid for the trip. And also, he is going to spread the word around the port and make sure that Davy never got a job on a fishing boat again. So he's kind of stuck. He's going home, and he's not, he's not feeling too happy along. And as it says here in this little extract from the story, which I've just found on my computer while I was talking away there, I'm feeling quite pleased with myself here. In this little excerpt from the story, it says, as Davy trudged on along the road, nursing his misery, he became aware that he was not alone. A stranger had fallen into step with him, and was now keeping step with him by his side. The stranger was a tall, good-looking man, and he was leading a black and white cow by a rope around its neck. Davy was too depressed to pay much attention to the man, which was something he regretted later. Had he looked a bit closer, he might have noticed his feet. He didn't have any. Just a pair of hooves, while on his head there grew a pair of horns. But Davy didn't notice any of those things. So he makes a deal with the devil. But then, of course, with the devil, there's always payday. So, but then his good deeds helps him. So, I'm not saying any more.
No, we don't want to give away.
Nobody will buy the book.
But that is kind of a trope, isn't it? That people who seem to be simple-minded or are somehow castaways, cast-offs in normal society are actually more, well, maybe their kindness overcomes, or maybe they actually are clever. It's just that people can't see it.
Maybe there's something in this karma business after all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
And that being kind and helpful comes back to help you.
Well, the old saying, what goes round comes round.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always a case of one good deed deserves another in this case. Like in the story from Orkney, the Selky that didn't forget, which is also in this collection. Walter Trail Dennison, who recorded this story in the Orcadian Sketchbook in 1880, said that it was the most popular story in Orkney in the 19th century.
Mm.
It's about a man, a Muir from Sandy, same as my dad and me.
Probably a relative.
Could be. He is going to take a pair of seal pups that have just been born, and he's going to make a waistcoat out of them. Because there's this girl that he fancies, and he wants to impress her. But the mother seal makes such a terrible, impassioned plea to him, but without words, just in sounds and gestures. And then when he turns to walk away with them, he hears this heartbreaking moan. And he turns around and looks, and the seal is lying on the rock there with tears running down from her eyes. And then the little pups that he's got hold of then try to suckle on his coat, on his jacket. And he can't do it. He can't hurt these. So he takes them back and gives them to the mother, who he says holds them, clasps them to her bosom, in her flippers, and gives him a look as if to say, I thank you, and I will never forget this, which she doesn't. But again, spoiler. But
anybody who lived near the sea, or even who has visited and seen Selkies, knows the heartbreaking sounds they can make, and the big, doughy, sad-looking eyes.
The one thing is that, seals can make an array of noises, from kind of howling, a bit like kind of the ghost of a dog. It's not like a dog howling. It's more like the ghost of a dog howling. It's very haunting, very otherworldly. But they also grunt, and they growl, and they make lots of different noises.
Oh, they blow bubbles in the water.
They blow bubbles underwater as well.
I didn't believe you until I actually saw one do that.
Mm-hmm.
They play.
No, they face under the water and and it just seems to be them. I don't know. There's probably some sort of reason for it, but it just seemed like they were having a laugh.
I think they're just having fun.
I have seen Selkies playing chicken with the cliffs and Rousey, coming in on a wave, and then there would be, 3 or 4 of them coming in on this wave, and then they would wait until they were just about at the cliff, just about to get their face smacked into the cliff, and they would turn and swim back out again, and then wait to catch another wave and get inside the wave and go back to the cliff. And they were playing chicken with it. So they do seem to have a sense of play as well. But there was a night, I'm sure I've probably told everybody this, people are sick of hearing it, but hearing a Selkie sobbing one night just like a woman. I thought it was a woman sobbing her heart out down at the shore below where I was born. But then there would be an unearthly kind of haunting groan that was definitely not human. But then the woman's sobbing would start up again a minute or two later. And then the groan at the end of it again. And I realised it was a Selkie. And they do make this incredible sobbing noises that does just sound like a woman, sobbing from the heart.
So you can see where the stories developed from, because they do seem human in so many ways. Mm-hmm. They'll stare at you, and they'll follow you. That day we were walking around Grahamsey with my kids, and the whole, what is a group of Selkies called?
Oh, there's various different sort of things. There's herd, there's pod.
Oh, I thought
there's different collective nouns for it.
A pod of them was following us around the island all day, just watching us, curious.
Well, they do that. They follow people.
But they seem to really, make a connection with humans, and maybe that's what makes us think that there's a human inside.
There's curiosity there, that they follow you, but also the one thing that they absolutely love is music. And they will come to hear music, or even if you just whistle at them, even if it isn't a tune, it's just you whistling, the head will come up and they'll come in to see what that was. And then other heads will appear as well,
Yeah, I love that.
You could start with one and you end up with a few,
Yeah. We should probably explain that in Orkney, Selkie is the folkloric creature, but it's also a common name for seals.
We call seals Selkies here. People think that Selkies are only the supernatural shapeshifters, and the rest of them are seals. But we call them all Selkies. But that's what I was always brought up. I don't know if anybody else was different, but I was always brought up as, a seal was a Selkie.
And just for the record, what kind of seals, speaking folklorically, would be the ones that would be humans or be able to shed their skins and become human?
The magic ones.
Yes, but...
It's the North Atlantic grey seal. The common seal or harbour seal wasn't regarded as being one of the Selky folk. They were just...
That was a tang fish, right?
They call them tang fish, which just means tang is like seaweed. It's could be referred to kelp forest, tang.
So it was almost considered seaweed, not the same type of creature, even.
It was a fish.
Yeah.
Even though of course it's not a fish, it's a mammal.
But that's the way they looked at it.
That's what, they were tang fish, but then there were selkies. So they made that distinction. But, to my untutored 20th century, childhood, they were just all selkies.
Since we've been talking about Selky folk, are there more Selky stories in the book you just wrote?
Well, there's a few, yeah. There's quite, well, of course there has to be, doesn't there? And also, I do like me a Selky. Yeah.
They're the best.
They are kind of cool. And so, yeah, there's ones from the Western Isles, and there's ones from Orkney and Shetland, and this is an extract from one of the Shetland stories. It's called the Selky Bargain, and it's set on the V Skerries, and the V Skerries are west of the island of Papastour. We were there last summer, remember, with Adventure Canada. We were bobbing about in a little Zodiac, and I was pointing out that these rocks over there that were, they were so, level with the sea kind of thing that you could see them, but any kind of tide would have covered them, and any strong waves would have swept them. But the people from Papastour used to go out there to club selkies and skin them because the skins were valuable. Mm-hmm. And a group of men went out to do this, but one man was left behind on the V Skerries because a storm blew up and they had to run to their boat, and he was further away on the Skerry and he didn't make it back in time. And the wind had blown up so fast that they were unable to go back and rescue him. So he was left there basically to die because the waves would have covered the Skerry. And if the waves didn't sweep him off and kill him, he would have died of exposure. So he's left on the Skerry along with the bodies of the selkies that they have killed.
Oh.
And then he sees the seals swimming towards them to the rocks. And this is another little excerpt here. They hauled themselves clumsily up onto the rocks, and then the man beheld a sight that few have ever seen. The seal... I'll do that again.
Just start over.
They hauled themselves clumsily up onto the rocks, and then the man beheld a sight that few had ever seen. The seals shed their skins and stood up in human form. Beautiful people they were as well, both the men and the women, graceful and slender. How unlike their sea form were the Selky folk. They walked over to where the bloody remains of the seals lay, and they set up a wail of grief. They touched the bodies tenderly, giving them a little shake as they did so. The man watched in disbelief as the dead seals started to twitch and move. They were no longer a bloody mass of flesh and blubber, but transformed into people as well. They had not been killed, only stunned by the hunters' clubs. It was like they had just been awakened from a terrible dream. They looked down at themselves and, realizing what had been done to them, they too started to wail and lament their fate. Their sealskins had been taken, and they could no longer return to their home in the sea. They were condemned to live on the land, a fate for which they were not suited. So, it's always an emotional one, the Selky stories, and I make no apologies for it.
They're so powerful.
Mm.
There's always themes of longing and loss and choices and
loss of identity as well.
Yeah.
And then trying to regain your identity, get yourself back. So, yeah.
Is there any difference in the Selky stories? First of all, I was wondering, I know there are Selky stories in Shetland and Orkney. They also are in Ireland, aren't they? And where else?
Well, just all around Scotland. Not too sure about England. I guess there must be. It must have spread, you know.
Do you see any difference in the style of the stories?
Well, sometimes people get mermaids and seals confused. And I think that's probably because the Selky folk in Orkney were very, very strongly, Selky folk. And there was absolutely no mixing it up with anything else, with mermaids or anything. And I mean, Walter Traill Dennison actually commented on that in articles that he'd written in the early 1890s, just before his death. He said that that an Orcadian would never mix up seals and mermaids. And yet he had a friend in Shetland that said that he had only ever heard of a mermaid through English literature. So it was like, Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, things like that. That was the literary sources was the first that he'd heard of them. And yet Dennison said that mermaid stories were more common in Orkney than anything else. And there is a really cracking mermaid story in here as well. There's an Orkney story of how the mermaid got her tail, but there's also a story from Caithness of a mermaid that fell in love with a handsome young man and kept showering him with money and treasures to
don't give that
to
one away.
win his affection. But he was very unwise with what he did with it, and
was foolish,
ended up suffering a terrible fate.
As is only right.
Absolutely.
And then there are in Orkney, they have the different ways of presenting a mermaid where instead of a tail, sometimes there's a gown that's been gathered at the feet. Well,
that's something that I don't go into in this book, but in Mermaid Bride and all, you can, and in Orkney Folk Tales from History Press as well, you can read the stories from Sandy. Dennison said that the old men and the old women would set up arguing about what the mermaid was like, because the men said that she had a fish's tail, that this was part of her body, it was physically attached. And the old women said that the old men were foolish, and that the mermaid had a beautiful petticoat that was decorated with gold and silver, and it could be tied over the feet while she was in the sea swimming. And so that it looked like a tail, but when she came ashore, she could untie it, and there was a beautiful pair of white legs that she could trip across the sand with.
Well, that's handy. It's a lot easier than having to go find a sea witch or something to give you a pair of human legs.
Yeah, it has its advantages, it must be said.
So in Orkney, the mermaid and the Selky are not confused as much as they are in some other places.
Whereas you get that in the Western Isles and in Ireland, they're almost kind of interchangeable. And I might get letters saying, I think you'll find. And fair enough. I mean, I'm not pretending that I am the great expert on anything, because I'm not. I have spent most of my life immersed in all of this sort of stuff. But it doesn't mean to say that you can't learn something new. And that it doesn't mean to say that you know everything, because you don't. Nobody does. So I just want to make that point clear. Safe for death threats.
I don't think we talked about this yet. I started to allude to the differences between Orkney and Shetland tales. They both came from, obviously, the same origin, because Orkney and Shetland are kind of cousins, really, but they're very different cultures as well, or slightly different, maybe not too different.
Well, there is
very
quite
distinct.
Yeah, there are distinct differences between Orkney and Shetland, and it's the stories in Orkney tends to be, we are at a cultural crossroads between the kind of Celtic and Scandinavian worlds. So some of the stories here are very much, from Scandinavia, you'd find
because
the
of
same story. Because of the Vikings. Yeah, who else?
The ubiquitous Vikings.
The misunderstood Vikings.
Oh, yes.
The flower pressing, stamp collecting Vikings.
Right. They're just misunderstood farmers, right? Sailors.
Yeah, just, and there was that time they visited a church and it happened to go on fire, and they
8
managed
times in a row.
They managed to save all that treasure out of it,
Yes,
and
that's right.
that time when all the monks suddenly mysteriously dropped dead. Yeah. But anyway.
It all depends on your viewpoint.
It does. But you kind of shouldn't be too flippant about things like that either, because if you were standing on a shore minding your own business and you saw a longship coming towards you, you were not going to have a good day.
No, it would be terrifying. Yeah.
And with some justification.
Yeah.
You were either going to get slaughtered or else carried off and sold in a slave market. So yeah, we shouldn't, I'm not trying to make out that I'm just having a laugh, because you bloody got in as well, otherwise you greet.
That's right.
So, but Orkney has got that mixture of Scandinavian and Celtic, but also a little pinches of things that just don't really fit in anywhere else, and are probably, unique to the islands, I would say. And in some cases, they are interpreted by Vikings as something that they understood from their culture, and they may give a name to something, but it doesn't mean that it's the same as back where they come from. It's a different creature altogether, but it's just corresponds with some traits that they kind of go, oh yeah, right, that'll be that, So it's like when you came here first and you're looking for shortening, and it was like, what the hell's shortening?
Yes,
I have no idea.
I couldn't find shortening. Nobody knew what I was talking about. Except one lady who, bless her, had lived in America for a while, overheard me trying to explain to you what shortening was, and said, here, follow me, I know what it is. She showed me. I can't remember what it is. It's what it's called, but it's not called shortening.
It was a block of stork margarine. It was like, hey.
It's for pastry baking and things like that. But yeah, I never would have found that.
No, I had no idea. I mean, shortening was just something that Henry VIII did with his wives. He got fed up with them,
More gallows humor.
Well.
That is quite common here, I should say.
Yes, we do have a dark sense of humor. But so the Selkies are well represented in this book as well, and there is a really, really, really dark story called The Selkies' Revenge. Again, another story that Linda Williamson gave her blessing for me to use of Duncan's story. And about a minister who hates seals because he lays nets down below his house, which are expensive, and then the seals get into them and tear holes in them, which is a problem for him, and of course an additional cost, and they take his fish, and so he hates the seals. But his wife is probably more Christian in her outlook, in that traditional sense, that she says to her husband that, the Selkies and like all creatures were made by God, she said, and it was, and that they have every right to fish in the sea as well, even more so than him, you know. And one day he catches a baby seal in his net and kills it.
Mm.
And that leads to repercussions.
Mm.
But it's a very sad, tragic, and very dark story.
Mm.
So, no spoilers, though.
Do you think the darkness, does that come from the Nordic strain, do you suppose? Or I don't know as much about folklore as you do. Is that common in the Celtic countries as well?
Oh, yeah. You come across stories like Deirdre of the Sorrows. And all that,
right.
the Children of Lear and all that. And it's,
right.
Oh, yeah, tragic Celtic stories. But I've always had a kind of a very well-defined and very broad streak of melancholia in me. It's who I am, and so I am kind of drawn to darker stories as well. But this is not a book that's going to mean that you're going to need therapy at the
it's
end
not
of it.
hard work, no.
You're not going to need counselling. You're just it's a mixture of things, because there's also a version of Asi Patlin's Stoorworm in here, which is a well-known Orcadian story. But this is the alternative version, because it was one that was gathered by Walt Trill Dennison and Sandy, or so he says. He possibly had a hand in creating some of it, I don't know. But the thing is, it was published during his lifetime, but it was in the early 1890s, so he died in 1894, so it wasn't long before he died. But it has extra characters in it as well, and has there's a lot of differences in it, and lots of extras in it, extra characters, extra dialogue and stuff like that. So it's the same story, but it's
different version.
Has its differences, yeah. But so that was worth kind of shoving in there too, I thought. And the Western Isles was well, you were a bit spoiled for choice, obviously, but there was stories in that. The one that I like is there are stories about two whirlpools. The one is the Selky, just south of here. It's the Svelger in Old North, the swallower, and that appears in one of the stories. It's a story that I've always told as being, from Orkney, because that was at one time. But I have to admit that it seems the Selky is off the island of Stroma, which is part of Caithness. Then I have attributed to Caithness, which I thought was very, very big of me. The other one, though, wonderful story, and people probably know it. It's not an unknown one, but it's the story about the Corrie Vrecken, the whirlpool off the Isle of Tura.
That's in my favorite movie. I Know Where I'm Going, it's called, with Dame Wendy Hiller as a young woman. Oh, I love it. I just love it. Saw it at the West Side Cinema, which is a local filmmaker and his wife and some other people put on a cinema in the wintertime on Saturday nights here in Stromness, and they play the most interesting films. And that one was on one night, and we all go and bring a bottle with us and sit around at tables and watch the movie. And then there's an intermission with, of course, a raffle. And then sometimes there's a talk, too, involved in it. It's really a fun night. But that was one of the films one night, and I just fell in love with it. And that story was central to the movie. So I will say no more about that. But that's my plug. It's called I Know Where I'm Going. If you want to look it up, it's on YouTube.
I was rather amused at the fact that you absolutely adored it, and then the next time I went down to Stromness Books and Prints, Sheena was saying, God, that was the worst film I've ever seen in my life. That's 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back. I went, oh, Rhonda liked it.
I have been vindicated, though, because I looked it up online, and a lot of people think it's just, I mean, even very famous filmmakers call it the perfect movie. Like, there's something in that. I knew it. I don't know why, but I knew it.
Friends of mine who live locally here were actually discussing it on Facebook not that long ago, and everybody was compiling in. We're going, oh, I love that film.
Oh, good. So I'm not the only one.
No, you're not the only one.
I thought it was just because I was American and, a sucker for all these stereotypes.
Well, you see, to me, the Corrie Wrekin was, which is like the Cailleach's vat, where she does her washing. The Cailleach is it's a word that kind of means, it's a combination of things like hag and witch.
She's kind of like a powerful old magic woman, isn't she?
It's basically, it's a goddess. Yeah. It's a Celtic goddess of winter. And she sits on top of Ben Nevis and has a hammer, an iron hammer, a bit like Thor. When she hits the ground with it, everything freezes.
Cool.
And but anyway, the story goes that there was a young man from Lakeland, which is what people in the Western Isles used to call Norway. So he was a Viking, fell in love with a local chieftain's daughter, and he wanted to marry her, but the chieftain refused. And in the end, he said that if he could anchor his ship for 3 days and 3 nights in the Corrie Wrekin, then he could get his daughter as her hand in marriage. So he has to find a way of going back to consult with the wise men of Lakeland. He is told that he has to have 3 ropes, 3 cables made, one of wool, one of hemp, and one of maiden's hair. So the maidens had to give up their hair, but they had to be pure. It didn't end well.
Don't give it away.
No, but it's a cracking story, and there is quite a few witch stories from around there as well.
Can you explain what, I mean, around here, what do you mean by witch? Because I think people have a different idea of it in different areas.
They were predominantly women who had magical powers, and usually for ill. So you got witches that could help people, white witches. They weren't referred to as white witches.
Would they have been more like the wise?
They would have been referred to as, well, here they would have been referred to as spae wives and such like. So they would have been more that kind of wise woman thing who knew healing and who could help. But witches were in league with the devil and raised storms, wrecked ships, could change shape as well. And there is a story, again, another tragic story of a Spanish princess who keeps dreaming about this handsome young man. And she dreams about him so often that she decides she has to set sail and go and find him somehow. And so she joins this large group of ships that are heading to England in 1588, the Spanish Armada.
You say that like I should know the significance.
Well,
help me out here.
It's kind of common knowledge, but not outside of Britain. Right. But she ends up in the Western Isles, and the laird comes out to the ship, the local lord, and it's the man of her dreams. And so they go to her cabin and never come out again for a week. And playing Scrabble, I assume.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But this was all very fine and well, and she'd found her man, and he'd found this most beautiful woman.
You're not going to give away the end, are you?
No.
Okay.
But unfortunately, his wife had other ideas.
Oh. Oops.
But And one that I particularly liked as well was the demon cats. It's a West Coast story. And there is a guy called Murdo, is a fisherman. And he fishes at night, which fishermen generally don't do, but herring rise in the sort of at the night time, or in the sort of like small hours of the morning, or kind of at sunrise, they rise to feed, and that's when you can catch them. So he used to go out fishing at night, and people told him that it was, he shouldn't, because it was dangerous, and it was a time when evil can be abroad, the devil and ghosts and such. And he laughs at all of this. He says this is all a superstition, and he doesn't believe in superstition. And so that's, he dismisses it. And then one night he heads off down to the fishing. And his friends say, for God's sake, you're not going out tonight, are you? It's Halloween. You should go to the church. There's a night service on tonight. You should go to that. And he says, Halloween. Superstitious rubbish. So he goes down to the shore, and suddenly a storm blows up from nowhere. He hasn't got his boat out, so you'd think he should be safe. But he shelters in a storehouse down by the shore, where they keep nets and sails and stuff like that. So keep it dry and keep it in good condition. And over the howling of the wind, he can hear more howling that is higher pitched than the wind, and it gets louder and louder and louder until the door bursts open, and in comes a huge black cat, like a domestic cat, but a lot bigger. And it comes in followed by another 11. There's 12 black cats with green eyes glinting. And then in comes an even bigger cat that is the leader of them all, and his fur is the colour of fire. Uh-oh. And he says, they all sit in a circle around him, and Murdo's cowering in the corner, and he says, why are we sitting here in silence when we could sing? Let's sing a song for Murdo. Let's sing, it's a death song in Gaelic, a song that you sing at someone's funeral.
Oh dear.
So they start to sing that in a more horrible wailing, screeching noise he's never heard in his life. Absolutely horrible and terrifying. And then when it stops, the big red cat purrs and turns to him and says, well, Murdo, you're going to have to pay us now for this lovely death song that we've sung to you. And he says, why should I pay for a death song that I didn't ask for and didn't need, what with me not being dead and all?
Uh-oh.
And anyway, what do I have to pay you with? And the cat says, well, Murdo, that's your problem. But it says, singing gives you an appetite. And he said, and I can see in the green eyes that my friends here are hungry. So he has a problem.
I wonder what will happen.
Because they sing this song 3 times.
A lot of these stories are quite dark. I mean, obviously, we don't know how this one ends, but some of the other stories we've been talking about do have that dark tinge. Are there any that are a little bit more lightsome and humorous?
No. I end it actually on a kind of a funnier note, because it's not humorous, but there is a very beautiful story called The Princess of the Land Under Waves. And it's a Finn McCool story. Finn McCool and the Fianna, the warrior poets, who are the defenders of Erin, of Ireland.
Yeah, it's an Irish story, isn't it?
But where do you think Gaelic came from? It's Gaelic from Ireland. The Scots came from Ulster, from Dalriada.
Right.
And
so it's not all that much. Well, I shouldn't say that.
So they came up and settled north in what is now the Western Isles and the west coast of Scotland.
Okay.
And they brought with them not only the language, but their stories as well. And so you get a lot of Finn McCool stories in Scotland and in the Highlands and all that, but the Western Isles and West Coast and all. There is a lot of Finn McCool stories. And this one is about Cheermid, the healer, who saves the princess of Land Under Waves with his healing powers. They said that they would sit under a waterfall by this pool, and when the sea was completely calm, they were able to see Land Under Waves, which was a beautiful place, with trees and fields of corn and streams flowing, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful land to behold. And it's the most beautiful wonder tale. And it's kind of a long one, but it's wonderful.
Can you explain the difference between a folk tale and a wonder tale? What makes it a wonder tale?
Well, a wonder tale is usually it's a journey, and it's completely magical. Talking animals that help you, and places with giants or but usually it's about a kind of a hero on a journey, and as this guy is, because he has to do certain things to save the princess. So yeah, it's a lovely story, but I kind of finish off the whole thing with because this is split into the east and north coast, the Northern Isles, Western Isles, and West Coast. And then there is, and finally, which is the story about how I became a storyteller. Which
vaguely disturbing, but okay.
Which happened one night when I was working on a farm in Sutherland. I had to leave Orkney to go and find work, and I was working away at this farm, and when I was asked to tell a story, I didn't have one. And so I had to do a forfeit. And I thought I'd go off lightly because I was given a old storm lantern to head down to the boat by the shore and get the baler out of it. The farmer wanted it to use it for mission out cattle feed the next day. So I went down and got into the boat, but I slipped and banged my head, and when I woke up, the boat was bobbing out at sea. And I discovered that things had changed, and me especially, and in a very significant way. So, but that is one that is designed to leave you laughing. A lot of the stories kind of are a bit melancholy and a bit sad, but short of making ones up, the sea has got that reputation,
true.
You know. There is one in it which is I do particularly like, and it's a story that, again, I only found it when I was working on this collection, but it's from Aberdeenshire, and it's called The Blackthorn Stick. And it starts out as a sea story because there's a young man who is saving up to buy his own boat so that he can marry the girl of his, his childhood sweetheart. Everyone knew that pair was going to get married. And he was saving up hard to be able to get a boat and also a house that he could live in. And then there's a storm, and this boat that he is in is lost. And he has to start again with nothing. He is saved. And he's lucky in that respect because not everyone is saved from that storm. But then his girlfriend says that, she wasn't prepared to just wait until he could earn enough to buy another boat. And so she would go inland away from the sea and try to find work and earn money. And so he walks a certain part of the way with her, and then he gives her a blackthorn stick that he had cut for her and to use on the way. And she discovers that all the crofts, the farms don't need anybody to work because the Fian market has already been. That's when you would go in and hire people for doing work on the farm. So nobody needed it. They had got all the servants they needed. But she finds one house where the old man of the house had died the night before, concealing a large sum of gold that he refused to say where he had hidden it. And there was a custom in that area that if a stranger came to the house, they could ask the corpse a question if they got the stranger to sit up with them all night, but they had to keep the front door open. And during the night, the ghost would wake up and say the answer to the question. And that happens, but it doesn't go quite according to plan. But it is actually quite funny. And she is, of course, far, far smarter than all of them. She outsmarts all of them and ends up coming out on top.
Like a good, clever woman story.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was a nice one.
I suppose the note of melancholia, I mean, when these tales were being developed, life was really hard for everyone. Mm-hmm. But I would think maybe especially so on the coast where people lived by the sea, because the land and everything in normal life is dangerous enough in those days. But to then add to it the danger of the sea, your whole family could be lost instantly.
Yeah. When my mother, who came from the island of Westray, came home one day when she was 16, found her 18-year-old brother's body lying on the kitchen table. He had just drowned. And he was swimming for pleasure because he was a very good swimmer, but he took cramp and died. And the shock of that, I think, was something that she never got over. And I think it affected her quite deeply.
And she taught you all to fear the sea, didn't she?
Yeah.
I mean, with good reason, she wanted to protect you.
Oh, yeah, none of us were allowed to learn to swim. I can't swim. Didn't stop me going kayaking in Stromness Harbour wearing a donkey jacket and a pair of boots, mind you.
But that's another story.
No such thing as life jackets or any of that nonsense. But you knew that if you capsized, that was the finish of you, so you didn't. I mean,
unless you did.
I wouldn't. Well, if I did, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you because you would never have heard of me.
But it's that constant danger if you're going to be out on the sea. That's
yeah. It's all the stories usually have that warning that the sea is something not to be trifled with, not to be messed with, and so there's a warning, I think, in there to all of us.
Would you like to say anything more? The book is available, and we're going to release this episode in April.
Yeah.
When it will be available by History Press.
Yeah. I enjoyed putting together this book, retelling the stories, learning new stories. And I'm very happy with the outcome of it. It's, I think, stands for itself, and it is released in April
2024.
2024.
Recording this.
So when you hear this, it's probably in the shops. And it's published by History Press. Scottish Folk Tales of Coast and Sea by Tom Muir. Me. My name is Tom Muir from the Orkney Islands in the far north of Scotland. And I have a new book that is released on the 18th of April from the History Press, and it's called Scottish Folk Tales of Coast and Sea. And it's a collection of tales from all around the coast of Scotland. So, in keeping with that and the theme of this broadcast, we're going to tell you a story from the sea. Now, this one doesn't come from Orkney, it comes from Fife and the east coast of Scotland. And it's called The Three Questions. Now, there was a man called Davy who lived in a small village on the east coast on Fife. And he and his wife Maggie lived in a small house by the sea. And he was a fisherman by trade. But the thing is, he wasn't a very good fisherman. You see, he hated the sea. He never wanted to be at sea, but his father was a fisherman and his grandfather before him. And when he was just a boy, his father had signed him onto a fishing boat, and off he went. But he wasn't very good at it. He had no love for the sea and no aptitude for the job that he did. And it was well known around there that Davy was, well, of limited use on board a ship. Now one day, he had signed on another boat, he was out at sea, and he got all the dirty jobs to do on the boat. He had to sort out the cat, throw back the small fish, and then start and gut them, which is a dirty, smelly, cold, miserable job that nobody else wanted to do. So the net was lifted and the catch was spilled out onto the deck of the boat. And then Davy had to set to work, gathering up all the small, undersized fish and throwing them back into the sea so that they could grow. Now that was the only part of the job that Davy actually enjoyed, was sparing the lives of another fellow creature. Now as he was working away on this pile of fish, a fish wriggled its way up to the top, and Davy stared at it because it was the most beautiful fish he had ever seen in his life. It was black and white striped like a mackerel with a silver belly, but it was 4 times bigger than any mackerel. It was a striking, beautiful fish. And it really touched Davy's heart that, this fish had to die. No, he decided this fish should live. He looked around him and he saw that his crewmates were all busy doing other things and nobody was looking at him. So he picked up the fish and he threw it over the side, and it fell into the sea with a splash, and he could just see the flash of silver as it dived down into the depths of the sea. But Davy had been spotted. One of the crewmen had seen him and told the skipper. Next thing Davy knew, the skipper was standing before him, swearing and cursing at him, saying that he would never work again on another fishing boat as long as he had breath in his body to tell people what a liability he is. I don't pay you to throw good, valuable fish back into the sea, he said. When we get back to port, you're finished. and don't bother asking me for any wages for this trip." And sure enough, when they got back to the port, Davy was sent packing. No money in his pocket, his reputation in tatters. Now he was walking home feeling very sorry for himself and wondering what he was going to say to his wife Maggie, when he realized that a stranger had fallen into step with him. A man was walking beside him. He was a tall, good-looking man who was leading a black and white cow by a rope around its neck. Now, Davy was so miserable that he didn't really pay much attention to the man. If he had done, he would have noticed his feet. He didn't have any. He had a pair of hooves instead, and on his head there was a pair of curly horns. But Davy was just so wrapped up in his own misery, staring at his own feet, he never paid any attention to the man. "You're very down in the mouth today, Davy," said the stranger. "Aye, I am that," he said. "I've got every reason to be. I've just been paid off for my job, and I've got to go home and tell the wife, and I don't know what we're going to do." "Oh, that's a terrible shame," said the stranger. "Yes, that's terrible indeed. Well, listen, I'm a reasonable man. Maybe I can help you." "Oh, how could you do that?" "Well, you see this cow here? That's no ordinary cow. That cow gives the most and the best, creamiest milk you've ever tasted in your life. Now, I'm prepared to let you have her on loan for 3 years. And at the end of that time, I will come back and I'll ask you 3 questions. If you can answer them, the cow's yours. And if I can't answer them," said Davy, "well, then you belong to me," said the man with a smile. Now, Davy was just so desperate, he said, "Okay, then, you've got a deal. By the way, what's your name?" "The Devil," said the stranger, and he smiled and then disappeared in a puff of smoke. Well, Davy was left with the cow, and he was walking back home thinking, what am I going to tell Maggie? I've lost my job and my soul all in one day. This is terrible. But when he went back and told Maggie, well, she took the news very well, actually. You see, she'd been married to Davy for years. She was well used with disappointments in life. But she remained cheery, and she said, we'll milk this cow, we'll see what she's like. If the milk's any good, then we can sell it. So off she went out with a bucket and milked the cow. She came back in for a second bucket. She came back in for a third bucket, but they didn't have a third bucket, so she used every pot and pan in the place, and she filled them up. Anything that could hold liquid was full of milk. And it was the creamiest, best milk that Maggie had ever seen in her life. "This cow is a wonder," she said. "And I'll tell you what, we can sell the milk and we can make cheese and butter, and we'll make a lot of money out of this, Davy boy. And you know what I've always wanted," she said. "It's always been a dream of mine to have a wee tea shop and sell cream teas." Now, they sold the milk from the cow and the cheese and the butter, and soon they were as rich as the milk was. And they had made enough money that they could buy a wee tea shop. And so they did a roaring trade doing cream teas. People came from miles around to have their tea at Maggie's tea shop. It was a wonder. It was the talk of the countryside. Everybody went there. Now, life was going along so well that Davy kind of lost track of the time. I mean, he couldn't remember when it was exactly that he had done that deal with the devil, but the time went by and soon 3 years had rolled past. The first that Davy was aware of that was when Late on one late afternoon, the door opened and in came the devil smiling. Now there was nobody in the place except for one stranger, a man sitting at a table in the corner of the room. He'd been sitting there quietly for some time. And the devil says, "Well, Davy, I've come for my coup, and I've got 3 questions. Are you ready to answer them, Davy?" And the stranger at the table said, "Aye, Davy's ready, and that's your first question." The devil was furious. "Will you mind your own business?" he said. "No, I won't," said the stranger, "and that was your second question." The devil's temper started to flare up. He was furious. He was not used to being spoken to in that way. And he says, "Who are you anyway, you interfering busybody?" And the stranger looked him straight in the eye, and he said, "I am the king of the fish. And 3 years ago, Davy spared my life, and I have come back now to repay the debt that I owe him. And that was your third question." And when the devil heard that, he was so mad he stamped his feet on the ground and disappeared in a puff of smoke. He hit the ground so hard that the flagstone there had a mark of a hoof in it for the rest of their days. But he left in such a hurry he forgot to take that cow with him. And so Maggie and Davy carried on with their little tea shop, serving the finest cream teas that has ever been had in the kingdom of Fife.